Your friends, your friends. Radio friends again. Radio friends again. We've got a lot to share.
Well, it's that time of week. You just wait. You wait. I just anticipate doing this. And so many days when I get on and get
Anticipation. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. We're already off to a good start. Now that we're recording. All right, I'm Steve Parker, and it is the 6th of September, 2024. And got a nice group of folks in the room already. And some people will be coming on, I'm sure. But let's just go around and say hi, because we're having some good discussions like we do sometimes when we're not recording. And Pete Salant from Virginia. Hi, Pete.
Hello, Steve. And I just spend all day Thursdays saying, tomorrow's Friday. Tomorrow's Friday. Tomorrow is where my friends are here on Zoom. I can't wait.
Thanks, Pete. Oh, then see, John Landry is here from East Hampton.
Yes, I am. How is everybody today?
Hi, John.
How are you?
John.
You got Lake Poketipog behind you, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's a great place to hang out.
Beautiful.
Bob Craig from Pennsylvania, around Philly, right, Bob?
Yes, that is correct. I used to look forward to Wednesday being Prince Spaghetti Day, but now
Wednesday,
Oh, boy, that's an old one.
Wednesday, up
Wow.
and down the street. Yeah, okay.
And we all
Antonio
we all
Furley.
do miss the great Prince, Dick McDonough, as they know.
with the Prince.
Yes, we do.
I think of Dick before I even think of spaghetti when I hear the Prince. And he got to come on with us in the earlier days when we started this. And
If Mr. Colt were still here, I would say Kaddish over him, but I can't. I won't.
Explain what that is for us non-Jewish.
yeah, really, because
That's the prayer you say over the dead Jews. So
sounds so much nicer than over the dead.
is that right? My Jew
That's
guys?
right.
Yeah. Okay.
That is what it is.
Absolutely.
You know what the Irish do? They stick them up in the corner and they drink all night.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds
Wait, what's the difference?
more fun than what we do.
All right, then we got the judges here. Judge is also Judge Marlborough.
Marlboro, Connecticut, still above ground right
You
here.
got a lot to like with a Marlboro.
Funny how those things stick in your brain,
Come
huh?
all the way up.
Amazing. Yeah.
Well, they have melody to them, What can I tell you?
I'd walk a
Great
mile
movie.
for a camel or a hump, depending which way you look at
Oh,
it.
Take a puff.
oh.
It's springtime.
Yeah, Salem, right?
You got a lot to like with a Marlboro, of course.
Oh my
Salem. What was
God.
it?
More jingles. Speaking of jingles, we've got
You can
thing
take
here.
the country
Tracy
out of.
Farm.
You
And
can
remember, Winston tastes good like a cigarette.
Like a cigarette should.
but you
Yeah,
can
there
take
we
Salem
go.
out of the country, but you can't take the country.
But you
out
can't
of
take the
Salem.
country out of Salem. Ding.
In my head, I always hear the theme from. You remember the Benson and Hedges theme? La 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 la
Yeah,
la.
sure.
I'm singing in the wrong key, but
That's close.
man,
You know, they never had Darth Vader do a cigarette commercial.
Oh my God!
And he
Oh,
would be the guy.
Ron Pell down in Cheshire. What did you used to smoke? I mean, other than just the band.
I smoked I smoked Marlboro Lights. Who didn't smoke? But yeah, I smoked. But then thanks to Dick Corson, I stopped smoking.
Really?
Believe it or not.
He also tried to. Never mind.
So did his
Yeah,
plane.
yeah.
Did a lot of bad things, but to me, he did a few good things.
Well, if he goes into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, I'm closing.
No, he won't.
We know what he's famous for. Bob Marks, Bart Mazzarella, down in Vero Beach.
Yeah, we've had a lot of rain down here, but we're waiting for the best season of all, and that's fall into winter, and that's when we have the best weather. But I want to tell you guys that when I smoked, and I quit when I was 21, I was a Winston guy. And the reason why I wasn't a Marlboro guy is because my stepdad smoked Marlboros, and I didn't want to be like him.
Wow.
Good.
And
There you go.
Dave Nagel is here. Dave, where are you at this morning?
Home in Plainville. Yeah, scenic Plainville, Connecticut. It's overcast day here. I'm sure you're probably appreciating where you are too. But yeah, former Marlboro 100 smoker too. I quit in the mid 80s.
And how's your wife doing?
She's doing okay. She's making progress slowly but surely. Physical therapy, occupational therapy. progress. They said, year and a half before they realize, before they can evaluate how much she will actually get back. We're just constantly working at it.
It's a
that's all
long
you can do.
road. Yeah.
It is.
Prayers out there for her. How about Kaz, Bob? How's she doing?
Well, I wish I could tell you she was doing better, but she's on a steady decline, and there's really nothing much they can do to help her. I mean, I pray every day that
Praying is good.
every day is might bring something different, but it's all the same every day. You asked. I mean, I wish I had better
but
news, guys.
unfortunately, I went down that road for a few years. So all our prayers are with you. Some group prayer stuff is always good.
Thank you. It's always welcome. Always welcome.
Sure.
God is good. He's still on the throne.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine whose mom is going through a lot. He's here in the neighborhood and she's really struggling. And he's total, believes in nothing. I said, that's okay. We'll keep her on the prayer list. We'll take care of you. Even if you don't, you have the power of other prayer behind you, no matter how you feel about it. And Jim Harrington, let's pray that he stays with us for the rest of this program. Good morning, Jim.
I'm here out in western Pennsylvania, and it's partly cloudy and starting to feel like fall occasionally, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I guess that's about it from western Pennsylvania. Not a very exciting place to live.
What did you smoke back in the day?
Well, I was thinking when I first started to smoke when I was in my teens, I used to sneak cigarettes and I used to sneak Lucky Strikes, Luckies, the first cigarettes that I got caught smoking were Luckies. I couldn't get over the irony of the whole thing, Luckies got me caught and grounded.
LSMFT.
I can't believe I actually smoked, and I did smoke till probably 1984.
Do you remember the Lucky Strike slogan?
Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
Yeah, fine tobacco.
Or loose sweaters mean. Well, no, that's another. I'll leave that alone.
My dad actually, my dad gave me my first opportunity to smoke, and he used to always have the radio on. He'd come home, he'd still have, I could see him perfectly. He'd still have his shirt and tie on and everything, and after dinner, he'd go into his room and he'd lie down and just lay there and just listen to the radio station. And he'd always be smoking. So, and I lay there right next to him. And so he says, well, you want a cigarette? I said, really? He goes, yeah, have a cigarette. So he gave me a cigarette. He lit it for me. And I'm like, this is great. He goes, inhale. I said, what? He said, take a deep breath. Bring it into your lungs.
Whoa.
I coughed and coughed and coughed and coughed. I handed it back to him. He says, still want to smoke? I said, no.
That's the greatest lesson he ever taught you.
Oh, yeah.
How many of you guys, when you had your first beer, and they always said it's an acquired taste. You have to get used to it, and cigarettes were that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Like who would ever want to, beer tastes so rotten, and why would you ever want to have it alcohol free?
Right. It tastes as you'd imagine horse piss might taste.
Good cup of horse piss. And I know horse piss.
That's true.
Oh yeah. It was,
Guys, I'd like to weigh in on something, a premise that was put forth before the Zoom call began. And I would like to vehemently disagree with the premise that Bill Drake destroyed personality radio.
Oh, good. Okay, let's do that then.
The opposite, to be honest with you.
No, I know, but I think so. For people that are just tuning in, when we weren't recording earlier, we were talking about personality radio, and one of the things I said, and it's only because of the fact when you mentioned Drake, the more music format, I saw personality disappear in Boston, and I used to love to listen to Boston personality radio back in the '60s. So, Judge, you may, your experience obviously was different, but I'm just saying whatever station out there, it was BZ or RK or whatever, when they went into Drake, the personalities pulled way back and it wasn't as entertaining for me.
May I interject one thing here before we get too deep in this? I got a message from Chuck Knapp, who used to work at RKO, that J.J. Jeffrey is, I don't know if any of you guys know J.J. He's in, I guess, a hospice. He has cancer.
He's
and he's, I'll try to find the address. Chuck sent a message out with the address if you want to send an uplifting letter to JJ in this, I don't know whether it's a hospice or an assisted living. Maybe it's just assisted living, but he does, I understand, have cancer, and he would, I'm sure, love to get a message from anybody who's listening. If there are people listening to this podcast and they know JJ.
I heard from Doc Fuller a few days ago that JJ was doing his best possible and had 2 operations the week before. And I know that Bob's wife, Linda, is doing just an outstanding job helping JJ. I didn't hear the word hospice.
Yeah, thank God. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just assisted living. But, you know, the thing is, I wanted to say a little story about JJ. I was going to school in Boston, and I was staying at the St. George Hotel. That was where the dorm was. And they had a restaurant downstairs. I guess RKO at the time. Maybe I'm wrong. They had their studios where the old WNAC was. And that was in the St. George Hotel initially. They later moved to the Government Center. But
what year is this, Jim?
1967 or 68? 68.
Okay. No,
that makes sense. About right. Anyway.
Yeah, you're right, Jim, because I was there living in the St. George Hotel at the same time.
Well, then you know, buddy. And I walked in there, and there was JJ having lunch. And like a typical student, right? And JJ was doing an afternoon drive on RKO, and maybe the biggest jock in the world. And I mean, I love what he was doing. He could put into 10 seconds what guys would take 10 minutes normally to do. You know, he had an incredible style and delivery. And so I walked over to him and interrupted his lunch with he could have been discussing contracts with his boss for all I know. I walked over like a typical doofus, and hey, you're JJ Jeffrey. I'm telling him he's JJ Jeffrey. I said, I just want to tell you, I love your show. You are really terrific, and it's an honor to meet you. And he could have thrown a plate at me, but instead he was the nicest guy, the most gracious guy. And as I got older, I learned from that. Believe it or not, that one little meeting, I never met him again. I didn't know JJ like a lot of you guys do, I'm sure, but that one little time that I met him, it was like it stuck. I thought, you meet people in this world, and they're impressed by what you do for a living.
Yeah, JJ was a very unique guy, and I agree with you, Jim. He was able to really master Drake format into being a personality and doing so many things on record intros that were just hilarious. And I remember one time, matter of fact, when I was at DRC, that McDonough and Bob Cohen, myself, Bob Raines, we left Hartford and came down to Philly, where JJ was on at WFIL. And I think I mentioned this one time before on the Zoom, that Bo got to know JJ pretty well. And the FIL building, which, by the way, is still there, but does not house FIL, it's still Channel 6. And it took us in for a tour, and JJ was on the air. And after he got off the air, we went across the street to the Adams Mark Hotel and spent the whole evening drinking and chatting and funny. God, JJ was just hilarious. My God, he would sit there with beer. He's the only guy I knew that would drink beer with ice cubes in the mug and smoke away and, just have a great time. And there's a guy that really did extremely well, major market radio, Chicago and station ownership. But, before that, when he was at WMEX as Melvin X Melvin back in the late 50s, he was really just another jock. And even at Waze.
No, he was not just another jock. He was pretty damn good as Melvin X Melvin. He was good.
And that station went, it was really tough to get a person. But he wasn't the same JJ. Maybe I should word this differently. He wasn't the same JJ that he was at RKO. At RKO, he was just really right on. He was tight. He was funny. He had lines. And he was always doing numbers on radio, people.
I got to Boston in 1961, fall of 1961, and looking around for radio stations coming from Long Island. And I discovered this radio station up on the upper end of the dial where I wasn't used to listening to radio from Long Island. and it's WMEX. And I'm thinking, what is this, a Mexican radio station? What are they? I'm listening to it, but I discovered it was a fantastic radio station. And Melvin X. Melvin was one of my favorite DJs on that station every afternoon. He was great.
Yeah, they had actually, well, Dan Donovan, who again wound up at FIL, he was there, and that was another guy that executed the format brilliantly, not only at FIL, but also at WMEX.
Well, and these are examples of the guys who, who really broke through any perceived restrictions of Drake, and were able to entertain despite these alleged rules, which were exactly that. They were not really true. There was no X number of seconds of maximum speech you could do. It was just get in, get out, move forward, talk over only the intros, not the outros and the intros, and remember, be a listener. Don't be the DJ. And that's where Melvin X. Melvin became JJ Jeffrey. That's how he did it.
Pete, it was the secondary program managers, the guys who were trying to be like the Drake stations, who screwed up. You people, you can only talk for 5 seconds and get out, and always say the call letters right up against the vocal, and all that nonsense. What you're saying is true. With RKO and other stations and KHJ, it was be tight, say what you have to say, don't oversay what you have to say, and get out. You know. It was, and I kind of like the Drake format. I mean, I didn't do a lot of it. I did it a couple of places. I went to MEX in '73, and they weren't Drake, but they were tight. Well,
you took elements of the Drake format wherever you went from then on.
Yep.
The night before, WRKO went top 40. As you probably know, they were leading up to it with an automated system that they had that Bob Henneberry put together.
Arco, the automated,
the friendly giant and all that. But the night before, WRKO went to top 40, which was in March, was March 15th, 1967. A friend of mine that I had worked with at BZ was an engineer at WRKO and WNAC. And he called me, and I just happened to be home that weekend. And he said, hey, you got to come in here and see this operation that they have set up to begin tomorrow at WRKO. And I went in and took a look at it. I had never seen a radio operation like that before. It was so condensed, where the engineer was sitting opposite the jock, but the limited amounts of carts that were in the studio. I think there was something like 30 carts and maybe a handful of oldies, and that was it. And I said, well, this is going to be fascinating. So the next morning I got up and I heard the first time that RKO went on the air with Al Gates doing the morning show there. And I said, man, this is something. The next weekend I drove up from Norwich into Boston, and man, everybody was listening to WRKO. Cars you would pull up next to, people talking about WR. It was such a unique sound. Nobody ever heard anything like that before. It was so well done, really well done.
See, well, maybe that's what I said, and Judge, maybe I should have prefaced that by saying I missed the you had to be very, very creative to squeeze it in that small period of time, because I remember listening to that and the guys would have to hit and run. But I guess because I grew up with a lot of you guys, speaking longer and doing longer bits, maybe that's what I meant to say, is that side of the personality radio that I missed. But did POP wasn't a straight Drake, was it, or what? Did you kind of define it yourselves over there?
POP was Drakeish when what's his name was program director just before Lou Morton.
Dick Springfield.
No, before
Paiva.
No, he was a jock on the air. I can't remember his name, but it'll come to me eventually. Danny Clayton, right. They were a Drakeish format, very tight, but they still had personality, because the personalities that they had were quick one-liners, quick jokes, quick say, get in, as Pete said before, get in, get out. I admired that radio station. I worked with Bill Winters when when we were both in the Army together down at Fort Bragg. And when I got to New Haven, Bill Winters was doing mornings up at WPOP, and I love the radio station. It's a place I wanted to go to, and I eventually got my chance thanks to Bill. Bill wrote me a nice letter of recommendation to Lou Morton, and the station hired me. I was the production manager during the week, and I was doing weekends, Saturday and Sunday when I first started. But I was kind of disappointed because the station was moving away from that Drakeish, fast-paced format. By the time I got there, they were floundering a little bit. They were going, they were grasping at formats. They were grasping at what they wanted to do and competing with
Bob Piva used to call it a Drew format.
I'm sorry, say what?
Bob Piva used to call it a Drew format.
A Drew format.
Like Paul Drew was for a short time our consultant at Waves right before, well, when you were there, and then he left. When I became PD, they got rid of him, but he was programming kind of the Drake wannabes.
Yeah. Well, when Danny Clayton left, Lou Morton became the program.
Lou
was a great guy. I loved Lou.
Yeah,
I mean, how can I not love him? He hired me, but he was not a program director. And Doc Fiddler was the general manager of the radio station, and he was not a programmer either. But the two of them colluded to think they were programmers, and just kind of screwed the whole thing up, which eventually resulted in us going all news.
Judge, what year did you come to the POP?
I started there in October of 1970, and as I said, I was only weekends on the air. I was the production guy during the week. I had Wednesdays off.
Wow, I remember, when I first came to Hartford, it was in March of '70, and POP just scooped the market. Everybody was listening to it, and DRC couldn't find themselves at that point. They were just kind of reorganizing, reshuffling, and all of a sudden, I guess, I don't know who made the decision, whether it was Charlie or Corson, but it was decided, why don't we get back to what DRC was doing like in the mid 60s and, stretch things out and not try to compete head on with the sound of POP, which I think they were trying to do in the late 60s. And it was very frustrating to listen to a great personality station like DRC trying to be a more music, and even some of the jingles were dropping hints of that. And it just really wasn't a great radio station to listen to. Then it started to shape up. The promotions got better. The jingles with little friends came in. And for some reason, as you had mentioned, Judge, POP started to, slowly get away from what they were doing, and they sounded disorganized, and DRC sounded pretty much together. And
I think they were reacting to WDRC at that time. As you say, DRC was started to get their act together and become a much better radio station.
Yeah.
One of the things when I first got there, as I said, I admired the station because I liked that fast-paced, Drakeish type format. And when I first got there, one of the first things they did, I think he started the same week or a week after I did, was Scott St. James was on the air in the afternoon, and he was anything but a Drake type format. This guy would talk for 45 minutes an hour.
I remember McDonough used to say to me, "Hey, what do you think?" Because he was opposite Scott St. James on POP, and he would always say to me like, "What do you hear about Scott St. James? I mean, the guy is doing some things here that are a little different, and people are talking about him." And he was very, very, very concerned about Scott St. James, and he had a pretty decent following. St. James did.
Well, he gave his phone number out. That was
Yes.
Hey, when I get off the air, call me at home.
If I remember correctly, POP
translate that to mean any chicks available for me.
If I remember correctly,
POP was into chicks. Tell the truth.
Judge, didn't POP have a punchy air sound? They were very compressed and they jumped out of your radio.
They did. They were always going about 125% modulation on a positive peak. So they where you could hear them, they pounded. Yeah.
Which I liked. I think it had a real punch to it. You know,
And God forbid if there was ever like a few seconds of dead air, you could feel the compression.
Yeah. You would hear that whoosh come right up. Yep.
Yeah, I was doing a weekend news, 2020 news in the summer of 70 at POP. And I remember getting behind the microphone and I had my headphones on and, WPOP 2020 news. And I felt like I was God. I mean, it was, what a sound. It was incredible.
Yep.
I remember when Paiva and my dad kind of spoke together. It's probably back in the mid-70s or so. I don't know if it was around the Billboard Award or whatever it was. But Paiva was talking to him about how they used to go out and flood Piper Brook around the transmitters so they could get that water up there, the water level up there higher. And, it was kind of interesting to listen to those two guys talking together, who'd been competitors for so long. But
the grounding was excellent down there. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it was really interesting because, again, growing up probably maybe a mile or a little less from WPOP. Here's the program director at DRC, and he would be calling up Wayne or whatever and saying, "How come they're louder?" And they would, because my dad had, my dad when he first went to DRC was an engineer, so he knew what he was listening for. But POP had a whole different sound. We still, I still have memories of hanging out the window and yelling obscenities as we drove by the building. I think I still do from time to time, even though I worked there. But yeah, it was a change. But what about when Triple C went all requests, when CCC did that?
Yeah.
I think dedications were always a great way to get your audience involved.
Yeah, dedications were one of the worst things you could have as a DJ because it was the same people calling all the time with the same request. Just very, very annoying.
What's the most famous dedication? Come on, guys.
Can you play Sugar Sugar by the Archies?
Oh, play
no, I was thinking
Color My World.
I was thinking of the air check of Casey
Kasem and the dog.
Casey and the dog. 2 a.m. A dead dog.
Casey Kasem, American Top 40.
There you go. That was a very difficult format to do if you talk to the guys who were doing it, because they were playing records on these big old 16-inch transcription turntables for all 45s, all 2.5 minutes, and having to they would record the request and then rewind it, get it ready, get the record ready, and by then they were already sweating. And Cy got his money's worth out of those guys.
The guy who I think was the greatest at that was Frank Holler. When he was doing his Saturday night request show on DRC, you'd go by the studio and literally he had CDs lined up against the wall outside the studio. And somehow he challenged people, request something you think I couldn't have. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then somehow he had the wherewithal to do the request, record the person, get the record. I mean, he was a master at that.
Well, talking about records, one of the things I loved when I first got to WPOP, I thought I was in heaven. It was the first radio station I ever worked at where all the music was on cart. You no longer had to queue up a record, and all of a sudden another record is ending, and whoa, I don't have to go to the next record. All you had to do was just grab a cart, push it in.
My recollection, I don't mean to interrupt, my recollection of Triple C when they were doing the all request thing is they were finally doing twin spin weekends. On turntable 1, I have X. On turntable 2, I have this artist. Which one do you want to hear? So they'd have that's how they would do it in order to alleviate having to go to the record library and try to find some obscure song.
Wow.
Parts were the easiest things to work with. I mean, like you said, you just slap them in the machine. They were there and they went. It was so easy. Yeah.
Imagine being us in New Haven in 1979. Waves had been all cart since 1972. And then all of a sudden in 79, we went to KC 101 and we hadn't had the time to create a stereo cart library. So all the guys had to go back to queuing up records. That was a rough transition.
One of the most cumbersome things that I've encountered in radio, Clark, you're the guy that's going to come in and tell people about this. When you were programming WCOZ in Boston, I couldn't believe it. They had engineers that were, tell the story, Clark, because these guys had to queue up album cuts.
Well, when we started COZ, it actually started on Labor Day weekend with the concert for Fantasy Park. And that made a huge impact on Boston. And then we had the live disc jockeys with the engineer facing us running all the records. And Dave Kroeninger would affectionately call them, oh yeah, the engineers, thumb, 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 sawdust. And, but one by one, we hired all the announcers. It was first me and then Captain Ken, and then George Taylor Morris came up from Hartford, and Leslie Palmer, Lisa Carlin, Jerry, the Duke of Madness, Goodwin, oh God, Rob Desiderio, and Mark Parento. And
But these guys,
great Air Force. We did
these
that
guys who were
in
engineers,
75.
the guys who were engineers, they had to queue up album cuts. And did you ever have major problems with them playing the wrong cuts?
Well, that would happen, but actually they were pretty good. And gosh, there was a great gentleman who just retired from the country station in Rochester, who was one of the engineers. He was the morning man, and I blanked his name right now. That happens when you get older. But no, it's just that there was great synergy with the announcers and the DJ and the engineers. No problems that I recall, but it was interesting to work with them.
There was an engineer at WHDH in Boston. His name was Al Walker.
Al Walker.
Al Walker used to do the play-by-plays as the engineer for the Boston Red Sox for years and years and years. I mean, I remember in the early 50s listening to the Red Sox, and at the end of the game, they would credit the engineer as Al Walker. So when I got to HDH in the mid 70s, when you were there, Clark, at COZ, and I was at HDH for several months, and for some reason or another, HDH was a TIC in a way. I mean, they played music. They were a middle of the road station in Boston. Jess Kane was the morning guy, and yada yada. But when I got there, I had to do a New Year's Eve program. And for some reason, HDH wanted to do disco on New Year's Eve, 1975, going into 76, because disco was popular. So I said, oh, all right. So I wound up doing like a 7 to midnight slate, and they gave me Al Walker as an engineer who did not really run the board. And I found out after working with him for about 5 or 10 minutes, you had to cue him because they had and we were doing discs that night and not cards. You had to cue him 5 seconds before you wanted to start, because he would be fumbling around. And this guy was up there in the years. And for some reason, it took about 2 hours to get the flow going between DJ and the engineer. It was hello, but a really nice guy, really super guy.
Irving Walbars was one of the engineers back then.
Irwin
Walbars. He used to yell at me because I couldn't pronounce Quincy. The right local way.
Quincy, Mass. Yeah. Those guys were there forever. God, I remember listening to that station in the early 50s, and Irwin was an engineer for Bob Clayton, who was at the Boston Ballroom up there.
Jess Kane was amazing at the time. Frank Kingston Smith was there. It was just a Hall of Fame place. Yeah. That was the year that they gave up the Red Sox, but kept all their tickets. And COZ beat BCN in our first book in fall of 75.
Yeah, Jess Kane was just phenomenal. Man, what a great talent. What a great talent.
Well, I tell you, it was really interesting being with my dad on the Cape, because we go up there every summer. And before RKO, I can remember, because we started going up very early 60s. And it was back then, he listened to BZ all the time. And then RKO came in. But some people I would hear compare every now and then to DRC, the Big D, to BZ. They would say it's like a little BZ in Hartford. So I remember that, because those were the two stations. The same way we grew up, we were in Long Island Sound. We'd listen to WNBC or WABC. Those.
And Ron Landry worked at both places. He worked at DRC and he worked at BZ.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When your dad would come back from Cape Cod,
yep.
I remember DRC had to change its sound for about a week or two.
Well, my sister was
so impressed with what he heard.
Yeah.
Remember that, Jim? All of a sudden, we're sounding like a different station.
Yeah.
For a couple of weeks, and then eventually we just kind of went back to sounding like DRC.
Yeah, he would. My sister would be riding in the back of the car, and we had this '64 Ford Falcon Futura, and or maybe a '65. Anyways, it was. My mom was always against convertibles. She passed away in February of '64. That spring, my dad came home with a white convertible with red leather interior, and we would go places. And my dad and I would sit in the front listening to the radio, and Kathy would be making notes in the back seat of the car. My dad would have her writing down all the songs and everything. But yeah, it was really something. But I wanted to just ask quickly, only because I know Lee Gordon just joined us, so we might talk a little bit more about the format back in the day between Lee and the Judge. But what about being over at 91Q? Because I know Bob, you were there, and Jim, you were there. What was their format like them with the oldies as far as
it was tight? When I was there, it was a very tight format. Lee Manson.
We did oldies mixed with some hits from that particular era, so it was kind of mixed. But we played essentially oldies, and it was a pretty tight format. You didn't do a lot of personality, It wasn't cue cards or anything, but close.
Now, Lee Gordon just jumped down with us. Lee, were you on the air at POP during that time with the Drake type of format?
Not the Drake format. I was on at the end. It was the Dick Springfield format. So whatever he could steal from wherever, that's what we were doing.
It was a better,
and then I was on 91Q with the rest of these boys.
It was a better sounding radio station once Dick took over, and I say that even though he fired me.
Boy, that's a nice thing to say that he did that, and you still thought the world of him.
No, Dick was good. He was a very intense guy, but he did bring the radio station back to a consistent sound throughout the day, rather than a hodgepodge of different programming that Lou and Bob Paiva and Doc Fiddler had created.
Well, you guys,
Ken Walt was the program director for a while, and he did a great job.
Who was that?
Dan Clayton.
Dan Clayton.
Dan, yeah. Well, Dan
Ken Walt. He's still alive and well in voice acting out in Las Vegas.
So what was it? Why were they constantly changing PDs over there? How often were they? It sounds like they went through quite a few of them during that period.
Well, they changed owners.
That was a revolving door. There were a lot of people that came and went. Jack Armstrong was one of the jocks when I was at POP. And he was quite a character.
Those are the days. Those are the '60s. WPOP.
Between 67 and 71, 67 and 70 is when I remember it very well from being at the University of Hartford and the little stations around it, and then going on the air in 69, 70 when Frank Holler got drafted to go to Vietnam. And we didn't meet until one of the DRC gatherings and hit it off immediately. What a great guy he was, and what a treasure trove of musicology and great tapes that he had that I don't know what happened to, but they would have been wonderful on radio stations today.
Well, Merritt Griffin bought the radio station in April of 1973, and Bob Paiva was still the program director, but he got bounced out of there within a couple of months, and they bought Dick Springfield in from Waterbury because Dick had worked for Merv Griffin down at WWCO. And then when Dick came in, he started again putting together a consistently sounding radio station. From 6 a.m. to midnight, it sounded like the same radio station. instead of the hodgepodge programming.
Was it? Would you say that when Merv and Al Pellegrino got together, and Al's background in New Haven, do you think that helped a lot when they with that format until they went to news, or how long of a period of time was it? 2 or 3 years before they flipped from top 40 to news?
Well, the problem was sales. I think we were doing well locally. POP was doing very well locally in sales, but I think it was the national sales that was where the problem was. They couldn't compete with TIC, with DRC. A lot of the FMs were coming on board and stealing some of that national business because of the new sound, the new formats that they had. So I think that had a lot to do with the change of format, the fact that they couldn't get a consistent book of sales as far as national.
And that's why they brought Al in, because he had some good connections with the agencies in New York, and that was Al was more there for that than for anything to do with programming. Al didn't insert himself in the programming, like to say, well, no, this Dick Springfield guy doesn't know what he's doing. Let's bring another guy in. Al left the programming people alone, basically.
He really did. Al Pellegrino was the first person who hired me as a broadcast advisor after CVS and gave me WIOF with Lou Morton as the PD. And I remember we did oldies at the time. This is like 1973, too. And there we did oldies on Saturday afternoon and cleaned up in Hartford. We had great ratings there. But Jack Carney was there, and Lou Morton, and
Lou Terry.
Lou Terry, rather. Thank you. And Al Pellegrino is just great, and he would talk about his daughters and his health and WPOP, and Gary Gerard was his sales manager at the time, but just a dear man and very funny. It was Al Pellegrino's cousin that I had to work with as the attorney for Quinnipiac University when I got 1220. So
yeah, Al was really, and Lee, you'll attest to this. Al was such a people person. Somebody people followed him because he's had a very gentlemanly type of way. And I can remember when we may have, because every now and then, we have a client that would get upset about something and maybe quit or cancel the order, whatever. And Al would, talk to them and say, what's it going to take for us to get to the point where if we're walking, you're on one side of the street and I'm on the other side of the street, for us to still be able to shake hands and say hello? What's it going to take to get, no matter what happens, how do we get rid of all that negativity? And from a personal standpoint, and even, and I've said this before, even when my dad wasn't coming back to DRC and I wanted to stay in radio in Hartford, immediately he said, POP, Al Pellegrino. And when my dad had his first double bypass, 1976, I think Al sent the first bunch of flowers. There was even though they were competitors, there was respect between the two men. And so when I went there, even he was with Gary Gerard. We had our first meeting. All Al kept saying, we were at the Red Coach, is Steven going to make money? Is Steven going to make money? He was really grilling Al. I mean, Al was really grilling Gary Gerard because Gary and I had sold against each other before. But it was, I think, what you said as far as the sales department wrapping their brain around things. The neat thing about DRC, we had guys that were selling there, like Ron and like Rob Branham, that loved the on-air product, that loved to go on the air themselves, whether they were cutting spots or anything else. That's a big difference between somebody who's just selling to sell anything and somebody that had the passion. Ron had so much passion. A couple of times he threw me out of his way when he'd go through a door to sell a client.
Well, Judge, you mentioned the national sales. The one thing that DRC had, and a lot of it has to do with national representation. We had great rep. Actually, Buckley had his own rep company back in the day, Buckley Radio Sales. But DRC was doing, in those days, probably $2.5 million, which was a ton of money back in the early mid 70s. And of that business, about 40% was national. And it was amazing how DRC cleaned up. A lot of it had to do with relationships in New York, no doubt about it, New York and Boston, but DRC. And the other thing is buyers knew DRC. I mean, DRC had this reputation like, oh, you're buying Hartford, well, you're buying 18 to 34, 25, 54. Well, you got to buy DRC. I mean, POP was there. POP was a terrific station. I knew Gary Gerard really well, and then Gary and Rob Branham was there in sales, and what's his name? The guy down, I can't think of his name now. But anyway, they had a good sales department, local sales department. But DRC cleaned up nationally. You were right about that.
Well, as I said, it was a good radio station for local sales. I went when I got canned in late January '74, and I went out to Providence for a few months and didn't like that. But I got hired. Bob Bresquet was the sales manager at that point.
Bob Bresquet, oh my God!
Green hats by
he hired me back into sales at WPOP, and I was doing well. It was a good station to sell on a local basis. I had an advantage too, and Steve will attest to this. We all had Gary Gerard used to say spec sells.
Always.
That's right.
So I had an advantage. I would go in there at night, and with my background on the air, I was able to produce my own spots to sell for specs. Some of the other salesmen didn't have that ability. They had to wait for someone to actually produce a spec spot. Yeah. I was able to go in and produce my own and be on the road the next day, going to visit clients and play in that spec spot for them.
Hey, Steve changed the whole culture at DRC when he was selling for me there in the 70s. Because Steve never sold ratings and didn't care about ratings. Steve's whole thing was he'd go out, he'd meet a client, and those Lexington Gardens and the other place. But Steve would constantly be in the studio creating spec spots and taking them out because he knew, when a guy hears his spot, this is what's going to be on the radio, they would immediately get excited about being on the station.
This is something I don't understand in this day. One of the things I used to sell spec, there's no doubt about that. But one of the things to get a contract renewed, you had to sell results. And most of the time, we would get some results for the client. I don't understand how anybody on radio, advertising on radio in this day and age, gets any results when their spots are buried in a 10 or 12-minute cluster of other commercials. How do they?
I've always hated that.
You talk about results. I used to do the analysis for a client. They'd say, well, your ratings aren't that good. Well, we'd be a hair. We'd be third by 200 average quarter hour next to the next guy. But I would say, well, let's talk about results. So according to Arbitron, we reach 250,000 people a week. Okay, you talk about results. What's 1/10 of 250,000? 25,000? What's 1/10 of 25,000? 2,500? What's 1/10 of 2,500? 250? What would happen on a Saturday afternoon if 250 people suddenly showed up at your business? What would happen? Well, I don't think I can handle that many people. We'll talk about results. That's results. The point is, how many people does it take to get for results to matter or make a difference in a client's mind about what radio station to use? I had a client on Route 66 in Portland when I first started, Furniture Liquidators, a furniture store. And I remember the guy, I went in there one day and the guy called Bob Grenier, called me up. He says, get down here right away. I want to give you a new contract. We got to be on the air. We had phenomenal results this weekend. I said, really? Fantastic. I drove down there. I said, how'd it go? He said, yeah. One guy stopped in. He heard the spot on the radio station. He bought $3,000 worth of furniture. Got to get on the air.
One guy.
Steve, that's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
What the thing is, we used to also say was, it had so much to do with what was the offer, what was in the creative, especially with the furniture. They said, if all of a sudden you got out of a bus and you were in the middle of the Hartford Civic Center with that many people, what would you say to them to basically get them to respond to anything? You've got the audience. Now, what is it going to be? And Ron, we talk about how flat print ads were and how much excitement you could create on the radio. And that was it, because I didn't have any accounts. And Dave Overson was wonderful because he'd always be there. Lee was fantastic. These were guys that would let me, because I was the kid that would do anything to cut a commercial.
You saved me a lot of work because you would, I had all the other salespeople relied on me to write their copy and produce their copy and do all their stuff. And you took that load off of me because you did so
Right.
much of your own stuff. By the way,
Absolutely.
the sales
right.
guy you were probably trying to think of was Bill Davies.
Oh,
Yeah.
Bill, but he loved the product though, didn't he, Lee?
He did, and Bill got it.
Yep.
Bill understood when he came in to me to have me do a spec spot for him. He understood that you don't just take the ad out of the newspaper and say, here, write a commercial out of this. He would actually go to the client, find out what they wanted to do, what they wanted to accomplish with their ad. He'd come back and relate that to me. And so instead of, I'd like to get our name out before the public, or we want you get our phone number. He would have some idea of what their objective was, and I could write and produce a commercial that would answer that, and Bill would go out and sell it. And he sold it.
One of the greatest promos for that kind of radio advertising. Remember the Stan Freberg Maraschino Cherry?
Yeah.
Stan Freberg was the greatest.
I mean,
I still play Sarah Vaughan.
Great.
I mean,
The radio promotion.
Well, the lake filled with marshmallow, and I've forgotten exactly how it went, but it just stuck there.
Theater of the mind.
That's what radio could do that TV couldn't do.
Now, that was the whole thing with Lux Bond and Green. I remember Bob Green, God rest his soul. He said, bring Steve Parker in because he knows radio, which was the greatest compliment in the world. And he really felt that his product, his jewelry, couldn't be really come to life on television. He says, maybe if we want to spend $50,000, maybe. He says, but I think radio will get people over that threshold of resistance. And they saw the value after I spoke to him for a little bit. They saw the value in hiring Dick Orkin. And let me tell you, man, when you don't even touch Dick Orkin copy, he's going to tell you what the copy is. They're going to hold auditions for a spec spot. But when he came in, and they did about 4 or 5 spots, and that one commercial was Dick Orkin. And that commercial was all about, finding the box in the underwear drawer and the whole thing. But it was, a gift from Lux Bond and Green, And their whole office they were very creative, but they had a sense of humor, and they knew how to use the humor. I think they did maybe the old photo hut commercials or whatever. I'm here in the back seat, Bob. But it got results. And actually, there was something written about in one of the trades about when most of the stations went to 30 seconds. And Dick Orkin's comment was, "It's the creative, stupid." I mean, it really,
and Orkin was on those commercials for Lux Bond, and Orkin only appeared on the commercials if he wrote them, because his company, the Radio Ranch, they did commercials for lots of people. But if Orkin wasn't if Orkin didn't write the commercial, they had a whole stable of really funny, really talented voiceover people. But if Orkin was in a commercial, it meant Orkin wrote the commercial.
And when
one of the things for a successful commercial too was having the right product for the right audience. And one of the best success stories we had at WPOP was J. Kane Furniture. This guy, he started off advertising in a bridal fair. I think it was like 1971 or something like that. And he would advertise. He had a furniture company out in Bristol where we didn't even have a signal. He advertised 3 rooms of furniture, the bridal special, he would call it. 3 rooms of furniture. I forget what it was. This is 50 years ago. So I think the price was maybe $500, $600, something like that. And he just sold furniture like you wouldn't believe. People would come in asking for the bridal special every day of the week. He would come in, and he did this for years. Even when it wasn't, the bridal fair was usually in February of the year. But he sold this thing throughout the year, and he made a lot of money selling the bridal special for years.
Well, I gotta say to Ron Pell, Gene Rosenberg, I mean,
oh my gosh,
he'd come in and he'd buy the old, like Greenberg and Beatman, he'd buy an old line Connecticut furniture company. And then the first thing he would do would be, send out the letter, tell them they're going to have this, they're going to be going out of business. But he would bombard radio. And the funny thing was, the results were huge. And I always wanted to say, it's a furniture store been doing that in the first place, they wouldn't be going out of business. But that was the whole thing. And
but that's why you needed to have a license to go out of business in Connecticut, because of guys like Rosenberg, whose job was to put furniture stores out of business and then put another one in and another one in. And that was originally the plan for Bob's.
Yeah.
Well, what
But-
really happened
but-
was he was smuggling. He was in the middle of the night. He'd have a going out of business sale, and the furniture would move, but he would bring in furniture from his own warehouse overnight to restock the store. So
Yeah.
the store never run out of furniture, even though they had a going out of business sale.
Yeah.
And that's when the state stepped in because there was so many complaints. The state stepped and said, "Wait a minute, you can't do this. You're selling your furniture, you're out of business, you close."
My dad was in the furniture business, and I had moved from New Britain to Newington, and I was living at the top of the hill behind what originally was Two Guys or whatever, and so I'm giving my father directions to get to my house, and he gets to my house. And he says, "Why didn't you tell me it was up the street from Bonelli's Furniture?"
Hey guys, I got to jump off. I have an appointment. See y'all next week.
Hello.
Thanks,
Take care, Bob.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bob.
Yeah, it was like I said before, Bill Hines was when he was the sales manager, and we had the ratings, the combo, we sell combo AM and FM, and he just said, leave the book here, because if you bring that with you as a reason to buy the station, what do you do when the ratings are gone? And that was so good for me because, first of all, the last thing I wanted to do was sales. First thing I wanted to do was be in the same radio station as my dad. Then I would have to be on the road and I'd have to bring in money. So that was where, it wasn't just Charlie Parker's Kid, which I was always very proud of, but it was also, bringing stuff in. And it wasn't until I realized that through spec, you could match your audience with the customer they wanted. And it was never that much about having, 100 million listeners, or if you had, 20 of them and you knew how to get them all to buy cars. It was like that, it was like what the judge was saying. It was like, knowing how to do the best results for the audience you have listening.
Yeah, your clients loved you, Steve. That was another reason. Your clients also really loved you. That had a huge amount to do with it. People buy from people they like doing business with.
Well, I think
people like doing business with you.
But thank you. But I think, Ron, the whole thing was too to have the renewal in your mind when you do all of this stuff. Because if you don't go in there planning on a long-term relationship with this guy, why do it? I'd say, do you think I'm going to have you? You think you're going to spend $1,000? I'm going to make $150. I'm going to kill myself to do a commercial for you and everything else. If it's a one hit, why would I waste all the time? And and also you have to love the pain of rejection. You have to. I didn't love salesmen, but I loved commercials since I could make.
I likened it to a Major League Baseball player. Major League Baseball player who hits 300, makes $30 million a year, but he's a failure 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
I'm hopping into this late, but I think the old expression is every no leads you closer to a yes. And
that's right.
You don't get the buy that you don't ask for.
That's absolutely.
And you can't be afraid to ask for a check. If you're afraid to ask for a check, get the frick out because you're not going to make it.
Yeah. Collections, that's a whole nother story.
I sell insurance and they want to buy their insurance. They need to hand me a check. Otherwise they're not insured. So
we had a guy, Tracy, at DRC back in the day, and Steve knows about this. His name was Tom Wilson. He had a store on the Berlin Turnpike called Wilson Seafood. And he was a big Brad Davis fan and a big Brad Davis advertiser. But the thing about Tom Wilson was the only way you could collect money that he would give you a check is you have to go down to his store before he would open, and he would open he had a seafood restaurant and a seafood retail store. He would open at 10 o'clock. Well, you had to go down there before 10 o'clock, before he opened, and you would have to have 2 big glasses of scotch at 9 o'clock in the morning before he would give you a check. I swear to you. And Rob Branham. So when I became sales manager, I handed the account off to Rob Branham, and Rob would go down there and he would he would go in and he'd sit down with Tom Wilson and he would have a glass of scotch. I'm talking about a big glass of scotch, no ice, just scotch. And that was Tom Wilson. And then Rob would have to sit in the parking lot to wait until he could the alcohol would wear off before he could drive back to the radio station with the check.
Be hammered with a check in his hand. I remember going there with Rob one time and I said, no, I don't want to drink. And Rob looked at me and says, yes, you do.
And you do. Got a drink.
9 in the morning, huh?
But
And he would make you, and he had a big vat of clam chowder. And let me tell you, Tom Wilson's clam chowder was the greatest clam chowder you ever had.
That was a great
And you'd have
restaurant.
it was, and he'd give you a bowl of clam chowder and a glass of scotch. And
I
you hope
used to
the clam chowder would offset the scotch.
It's a
I
breakfast for
remember
Balancing act.
champions.
when he started, I think, and Ron, maybe I'm wrong with this. It seemed like when he started pulling back and not spending as much, that you could really go by the store and see that the amount of cars in the parking lot were actually dropping back. And you would always
Yeah.
remember that, and that's the thing. Oh, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm all
His
set.
father, if you remember, Tom took over the business from his father, and his father stayed for a while until I think he passed. And his father always had his eye on the business. When his father left, Tom really didn't, it got dirty. He didn't take care of the place, and I think part of it was, I mean, Tom was a functioning alcoholic, essentially. That's what he was doing. And he was drunk all the time. I mean, literally, the guy would start drinking at first thing in the morning, and then he'd start cooking. I mean, he was a great guy. And his wife, Mavor, remember her? She was a lovely lady. She was a Scandinavian. And he spent a lot of money. He was on with Brad 3 times a week, 4 times a week for years, religiously. And Brad would go down there all the time. Brad would get drunk. I mean, that's kind of Tom's modus operandi, but a great guy.
No,
But
Brad,
yeah,
and Brad, like you say, Brad got the results. Brad knew how to go on and on and on.
Brad was legendary for results.
I remember when I first started at the station is that I saw Brad on the Berlin Turnpike, Brad Davis on the side of the Jeep and the whole thing. I followed him up to his house in the middle of the afternoon. Oh, Stephen, come on in. He was sitting there eating Dave's bagels with lox and straight scotch. And I'm sitting there, and he said, and I bit into the lox, and it was just like, I couldn't stand it. It was just the worst thing in the world. And I grabbed a glass of scotch and I'm washing it down with that. I'm like 24 going back to the station, hammered out of my brain.
We had, the group of clients in those days. We had Teddy from the Fly Front. This is all about Brad Davis. Brad, by the way, nobody could do live spots like Brad Davis.
Oh,
Friends, he started every year with Friends, and he would go on for minutes, far more than a minute. That's what people like getting, I'm getting more for my money. But Brad had a way of sending people through the door. It was just unbelievable. And so this guy Teddy, he owned a store called the Fly Front. They sold jeans, the Fly Front. He would outfit Brad with all his jeans, and Brad would end every show with "Keep your jeans tight." That was his motto. And we had Davis Bagels, Teddy at the Fly Front, Wilson Seafood. There's about a dozen or so clients that were on all the time. Every morning they were on, and Brad would do their spots live, and the revenue was phenomenal. I mean, Brad just brought in so much money, and oh my God, those are the halcyon days.
And the people wouldn't argue rate. Say, here's the rate for Brad.
Right.
And I remember coming back. I came back and with a deal I put together, and the guy, wanted, I think it was Guida, wanted a commercial almost every hour, 16 spots. And he said to me, he goes, I came back and I said, well, I almost had Guida, but he wouldn't pay this rate. And Heinz goes, he'll pay that. What rate will he pay? Okay, you got to go get that. Right. I don't want to, we're running out of time, but I want, just real quick, we got Lee piped in about his side of the business, but Dave Overson and Dave Nagel, you guys, interchanged, when Dave came in, when Dave was leaving, and, that whole thing, rigmarole there. But you guys both worked on the creative side. Did you have a lot of, you want to give us a quick story before we get out of here?
I think one of my favorite memories is of you. Okay. Spec Spot crazed Steve runs into production. I think it's a Friday morning, which was the jamming day of the week because everybody wants to get everything done early, but wants to go get their haircut or whatever. So shit comes in late all the time. Steve comes in with a spec and he's so excited. You got to turn this around. You got to get the clients hot. I'm going to close this today. I can't wait to come back with it. And it's like, so I don't check the cassette. I'm in such a rush to get him out the door. He goes out, the freaking cassette's blank. He comes back. I'll never forget the expression on your face. Like, I expected you to be really upset, but you were just so disappointed, Steve. And it stuck with me. Never send anything out without checking it. Never. That stuck with me throughout the rest of my career. So you got me beat, Dave. That was thank you. Okay.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, Steve would come in and totally unexpected because back then, I mean, you had to book the production room, and I started that, and so we come in and he says, Dave, we got to do this. We got to, then we did this bedroom spot where we had to become a drill instructor. We needed a group of troops.
Water bedroom, got a new store. It's in Avon, Route 44. Sorry.
Yeah. So God bless multi-tracking. And I'm doing tracks after track. I made like 3 people sound like a platoon of military people. And remember doing that. And, finally sending it out. I did always check, excuse me. I always did check the cassette though.
I will say, I mean, this is a great ego feed for me, guys, but I will say though that you guys would bend the rules for me. And I remember when I went to work at TIC, and I didn't really, to me, DRC was and will be always the tops. But I would write spec spots, and John Capuano would come by and say, we have people that do that. I go, if you take this away, I got nothing. I mean, I got absolutely nothing, because it's always been whoever is local direct, whoever is the first one to come through that door, no matter what station you were with the commercial, that was what was going to win. I had one guy one time that asked me, who do I make the check out to? I mean, but so that was it. And also having managers like Ron that would just say, do that. And I remember even Adam Gronsky, I'd go out and I'd just shoot from the hip and I'd make up proposals that made no sense. And it was all about, bells and whistles and excitement. And, that's what made it work.
Yeah, but Steve, you were a very creative force behind those specs.
It's Charlie Parker and me, guys.
I mean, sir, they were a pain in the neck sometimes because I have to cram that in. I thought, like as Dave said, Fridays were a zoo day, and everybody would wait till like last minute to get their stuff in, and I'm there till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And I get home, Mary Lou says, "Why are you late?" I says, "Don't even ask."
All the sales guys on Friday afternoon, about 3:30, 4 o'clock, would duck their head into the production room, say, "Have a nice weekend."
Oh yeah,
we're leaving, and you knew you were gonna be there till 8 o'clock at night, just dealing with all the shit.
Well, you remember Hugh Freeney? Hugh Freeney.
Oh boy.
Hugh Freeney came in, and I saw a spot on his desk. So I asked him, I says, "You going to cut this?" Because 4 o'clock was the limit on Fridays. 4 o'clock, you cannot. Production room shuts down for any new material. And no, we'll take care of it. I'll deal with that. Well, 5 minutes to 5, he comes in. I got to get this done. And and I said, "What do you mean I got to get it done?" And he says, "And when you get it done, can you call the client and play it over the phone to the client?" And I says, "Yeah." I says, I want 10% of your commission on this. And he just hit the roof. He went to Heinz, and Heinz was just, Heinz called me into the office. "What is it?" I says, "Yeah, I want 10% because I'm doing all the work."
Right.
I said,
I would never ask you to do that. That's terrible. By the way, his son was just inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Good for him. Good for him.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you one thing, and I appreciate everybody and all the kind words, but the whole thing was what Ron understood was that we all got hired for a reason. And Ron saw something in everybody who worked over there, or Heinz did. But Ron would be sitting next to Heinz, being able to tell him if this guy will do it, this guy won't do it. He was my supporter. But I will say, though, when you would try to clone a sales staff, that was so wrong, and try to show them the right way to sell. If you just told them to get the number, don't ask any questions. That's why I don't do it anymore, because they sell radio and a bunch of other shit, which I can't do. But
if you've ever sold radio, you know it's a tough racket, and
it is.
As you said, Steve, you have to put up with a lot of rejection, but it's really tough when you have rejection by your general manager or your owner.
That's Judge. You're exactly right. You got to fight both sides.
I was selling after POP went all news. I got a job over at CCC. I was selling for Cy Dresner.
Oh boy.
I brought in, I can't remember who the client was, and I can't remember the exact amount because this is 50 years ago, but I brought in a contract, a significant amount of money. And it was like for a 6-month contract for some big bucks. But part of the deal that I made with the guy was that he would be sponsoring a concert line. What we had to do was we had to have a phone line put in. And I told Cy, I said, "I will take care of recording this every day and it was a phone line that you could call in and find out what concerts were coming up in the area.
Right.
And I told Cy, I said, I'll take care of doing this. Cy went through a roof because the phone line was going to cost us $30 a month. It says, Cy, I said, look at the money I brought in for you. He went absolutely insane because it was going to cost $30 a month for the phone line, which he proceeded to take out of my check every week for the next 6 months.
The guy that wouldn't give Howard Stern an extra $25 a week. He knew how to, really.
Night Dresner.
But well, listen, guys, we're going to get out of here. And what I'd like to do is, I think this is great. And Dave, obviously, this one is, for people that are interested in sales. This is, I think this is a good one. But also, Bob. I mean, Bob Craig, who's not here. We did start to touch upon the decline and and where it is now. And I think hopefully next week we can still stay on that. I did speak to Paul Murnane again, and Paul said that he wants to be here, but he's still dealing with some Odyssey stuff and all that kind of stuff. But so I'd like to see. I just keep asking him nicely, and he's a friend, so I think he would tell us if he didn't want to. But he says, I still want to be part of that. So hopefully we'll get on it. And again, if any other thoughts, pass them along. This has been some great stuff. And
I want to make a promo. Last night, Steve and I did our Talk About Radio over at RHCTV. And we did 2 shows. We had Tracy Carmen on for the first show, and then Ed Bruder on for the second show. And it was such an interesting topic that they talked about. And the show to me was a very successful taping. If any of you guys like to be on there, we would love to have you on. It's what it basically is it's a Zoom call. It's a Zoom call that we put you in a box on a set, and it's a virtual set. And Steve and I are on the virtual set, and then you're in the box. And it's very interesting. It's only a half hour long, and talk about yourself, your career, how you got started, and any other anecdotes that you have. But we would love to have you guys on there. And usually we're shooting for a Thursday evening taping, but we're pretty flexible too with that.
Yeah. And Pete was terrific. And again, it's like, I guess I enjoy this so much. I would do it every day, come up with different ways to talk about radio. All right, guys, we're going to do it again next week on the 13th of September. And let's please remember, we know what said J.J. Jeffries is struggling right now. Of course, I grew up listening to him on the Cape, one of the best. And if anybody needs any help out there, if you know of anybody who needs help out there, whether it's, financial struggles or physical struggles, or a lot of times those go hand in hand, please remember the Broadcasters Foundation of America. Because the Broadcasters Foundation are guys and women like us, well, like myself when I wear a dress, but they're people that really care, and they're there to help out and lend a hand just by, a few bucks here, a few bucks there, everything helps. So if you can make a donation, they really appreciate it. But again, if you need help, that's a good place to turn. So again, I want to thank everybody. I know Bob Craig had to leave. I think Bob Marks had to check out. But Pete Salant and John Landry and the Judge and Jim Harrington and Ron Pell and Clark Smith and Lee Gordon and Dave Overson and Dave Nagel. And of course, the Jingle Man, Tracy Carmen. You mean a lot. I'm Steve Parker, and we'll catch you next time on what show is this again?
Radio Friends
Radio
Again.
Friends Again. I think we got so many shows.
See you next week.
Take care, guys. All right. We'll see you later, man. It's really been a lot of fun. All righty.
Your friends. Radio Friends Again. Radio Friends Again.